holiday tree again this year. It's near the skate shack at Roberts Field, and it's decorated with painted silhouetted birds that you commonly find in Roberts Field. And people can pick up their birds at...
I always give them reusables.
People can pick up their birds at the map kiosk behind the Engine 3 fire station, and they can decorate them and then hang them themselves or return them to the box, and the Friends of Roberts Field will hang them up, and they'll be displayed there through probably the second week of January. The next announcement is that the Friends of Roberts Field is hosting a second brick campaign. They're selling 4x8 bricks that'll fill in blank bricks at the pathway inside the Friendship Park. The 4x8 bricks are $100 a piece. They feature 3 lines of text. There's also 80 symbols that can be chosen and added to the bricks. And the sale will continue through the spring, and there'll be a summer 2019 installation. And people can buy their bricks or find out more information and buy bricks at the friendsofrobertsfield.org/buy-a-brick. Any other questions or any questions? Any other input? So the first item on our agenda tonight is an update from Steve Yonley from the DPW. We asked for some specific information bulleted at the top, and we got the information back from Steve in 2 separate emails from the 20th and 26th, which I shared with the other committee members. These are sort of the pertinent updates from those emails. One is that we asked specifically about the installation of the shade structure, the installation of the metal benches and concrete pads that are going to go mainly around the 2 to 5 year old area, installation of a fence gate near the 2 to 5 year old area, creation of the packed pathway from the parking lot to the playground, and then any considerations that the committee would need to have for hiring a contractor, and we'll get into more discussion on that. Steve's responses were listed here. Everything is weather dependent at this point. Grading won't be until the spring, and the grading was about response about the grading around the natural play area and the back of the playground. He also said they were trying to gather quotes for hiring someone to erect the shade structure, which the shade structure pieces I think are all in place there in the front. He added, which I wanted to get the committee's feedback on, does it matter on the shade structure if the shingles are cedar shakes or regular asphalt? He noted that shakes might look better and match the entry. Did you guys want to talk about that now? Do you have any inclination on that?
Is there a reason not to do cedar shakes? I assume it's cost.
I would guess cost, but he didn't share any cost implications, so.
Do they have a worse maintenance?
I don't know. We have Gary Persichetti here. Maybe you can help us.
Usually you get a little longer out of a shingle, but, and the cost is less on a shingle.
What is the time frame when you say a little longer? I don't know what a time frame on a shingle versus a shake.
Shingle is about 25 years anyway. A shake's probably closer to 15. They start to break down because they are wood-based material after a while. Start to crumble the edges and lose them as time goes on. The look, of course, is
I mean,
different.
I personally would prefer the shake unless people are against it. I assume it would be more cost. And
We don't know the difference in cost. Is
He didn't provide
negligible?
that, no.
Actually, to follow up on that, he's got a couple of prices. He's still waiting for 2 more commands on the whole shade structure.
Overall, I think we had talked about trying to keep everything as consistent as possible. So the entryway and the map kiosk both have the cedar shake, so it would definitely help to sort of tie those together. One other thing that I wanted to point out too is that I think that the posts that are in place for the shade structure are metal. So I would, if it was possible, it's possible if they're open to it, I'd like to see maybe the post covered with a wooden fascia, so that matches the two other structures as well. Because otherwise, it's going to be the one structure that sort of has the metal post. And I don't think the cost on that would be
Well,
too extreme. We can add, I mean, I think, yeah.
I would personally put it up with the black metal and see how it goes for a while. And that's not a big deal. Well, it's a
Sorry,
cost,
see
but
how
it's not
what
a big
goes?
deal. What?
You said see how it goes, see how what
Well, see
goes.
how it sits and goes. I mean, you're adding something else to it that can, of course, eventually rot, splinter, if you're gonna go wood around it versus leaving it as metal, which is pretty standard in a post, unless you would go with a 4x4, but it's not as strong.
The metal has to be there regardless, right?
Right, it would just, it would cover, it would
Would
wrap.
just be-
Oh, I know, it's covered that, yeah.
And there is a plan, there are plans to stain all the structures as well. So, from a finishing standpoint, they'd be finished.
I think that, if we painted it a green, a forest green, it would fit in.
They are forest green.
They are forest green, then black makes them a hazard in terms of walking into them.
Okay.
Let's wait on it and see whether it really doesn't fit. Pardon?
Everyone's forest green.
Yeah, they are green, yeah.
And given that the structures are forest green with the metal,
Yes, yeah.
I,
Okay, so anybody else have any feelings on the metal?
I feel
versus
strongly
wood?
we should install it as is and wait before we add something else, add another layer. If we have it there and we say, no, it really is an eyesore, is it worth splinters on a piece of wood? I mean, you have to weigh the pros and cons, but I say just, let's install it, see how it functions for a while. There's no need to run up the cost without even seeing what it looks like.
Question, just to show how much I've been out of the loop. What structures are you actually talking about right now?
Just the shade structure.
Shade structure.
That's it? No?
The picnic table covering the
Because
shade
you're talking
structure.
about the two posts, the metal posts.
4 posts, yeah.
There's 4 posters for straight shade structure,
Yeah.
Okay,
4 corners.
that makes sense.
So, anybody else have any feelings on the post?
We can always address it after. I mean, it's not like it would be, no would be put on during the build process anyway. So I think we should probably just readdress it at a meeting after it eventually gets actually built,
Okay.
personally.
Justin, do you have any thoughts?
I like the metal aspect. I like that. So you just go for it, yeah.
What about the cedar shakes versus asphalt?
I kind of like the cedar aspect.
I think will you help unify it with the rest, particularly if it's metal.
Yeah, I agree, it'll look better. I wonder how significant the cost difference is. That's a way to save money, yeah. But if it's small, then it's definitely worth going for what matches. I also don't think that the posts will be that big of a deal once we see them all up. I mean, the fence around the playground is black, right? Black,
Correct.
so it'll sort of blend in with that. I don't think it's a huge concern.
I'd want to hear what the cost differential is also. Just want to make sure it's a wise choice
Okay.
all the way around. And will the cedar shake last longer as well?
No.
Or beyond the life of the structure? Is it over improving, that kind of?
Adele, I think it's more consistency with other things that have been built.
Yeah, I caught that as I walked in.
And Steve's down and the cost difference,
Okay.
right?
All right.
And that-
So I guess what I'm hearing is that it won't be built and installed until we're able to provide feedback about the cedar shakes?
Well, like I said, he's got 2 more prices coming in. I can't honestly tell you, because I haven't looked at the 2 he has close enough to see if he priced it both ways. So he might have already have some of that information, which would be roughly the percentage of the difference.
Right. I guess my concern,
between the two.
right, my concern is that he may want to install it before our next meeting. So I don't want to hold that process up.
Yeah,
But what you're saying, what I think I'm hearing you say is that, that he will wait until we're able to weigh in on the,
Or if you wanna say right now that your preference is to be cedar, unless the cost exceeds a certain percentage, then it doesn't hold anything up.
okay.
Is that fair enough?
I think that's very fair.
Do we have
Yeah.
any sort of sense of the percentages difference between, I mean, I can do a Google search, but,
I mean, I would think probably anything less than 10% should be more than acceptable, wouldn't you?
Yeah,
Yeah.
I would like that number.
yeah, but I'm not sure that,
I have a question about finishing the shade structure now. What's the depreciation or breakdown value of it being up during the winter without it having really been used?
Really none, other than, you know, having an extra winter on it.
I mean, it's already sitting outside,
Yeah,
probably
but
not in
you're right,
good
but like,
conditions.
there's no roof material right now sitting outside.
Okay,
Plus,
There
yeah.
is the rest of it, but yes.
When you get in-
so it's already outdoors, okay,
When you get into the spring, there's other
I mean,
projects
really-
people are gonna be
really
wanting.
Not much.
okay.
Are we gonna have a problem getting it installed with frozen ground? It's
No, it doesn't, it actually doesn't go into the ground.
It just-
goes into this
it's the cement.
concrete pad, and it's already poured and ready to go.
Okay.
So the 10% is acceptable?
Yes.
As
Absolutely.
long
Yeah,
as it
but
doesn't
I
cost-
think if it's more than 10%, I think if you can send out an email and we can decide on put a stop, like, I don't know, I just don't wanna, is 10% is that as far as we're willing to go? I mean, do we, I don't know.
Well, no, well, my comment was, is that 10%,
Is an easier.
if the bid comes in and he finds the lowest bid that's acceptable, and it's less than 10% on the difference, then he can get started. If it's over 10%,
Yeah,
then, you know, there's two choices. Number one, if you want it to come back here again. Number two, it might change when it is done. You know what I'm saying?
Yeah.
Depending on how many weeks that is, it could make it so it's not going up now. But whichever way.
right. And I'm trying to get some sort of agreement here where we could say, if it's 10%, we go forward. If it's under,
just need to
if
vote
it's
it.
under 20%, we send out an email or something.
Do we have a dollar amount of 10% that we're talking about? We're just talking about the difference in the roofing material.
Yes, just the roofing material.
Mhm.
But clearly, that's all I'm saying to you, is if the roofing material just say comes in on one roof at 800 and the other one's 950,
Yeah, it's just not
okay?
worth.
You know, then you get your percentage.
Do we have a motion working on this?
All I'm saying.
But I'm,
Then-
that's
I'm
what
just
I'm
saying
not
if it's-
comfortable, but
if
I'm not,
it's-
I'm not comfortable having any kind of a vote over email though, because we can't do that.
We're not voting over.
We're not
I'm not
voting over email. If we set an amount that we pre-approve,
Right.
then anything voted now that just goes forward. So I move that we set the amount that any changes to the roofing material might be, would be 10%, and anything at 10% or less is not something we need to vote on, has already been approved.
Can I vote for 15% before we do this? I guess I think the amount better that it will make it look is worth an extra. I don't want us to be like, oh, well, we got asphalt because it was like 11%, right?
I would accept that as a friendly amendment to the motion,
So, that's my 2 cents.
Good.
Thank you.
because that was the number I was actually thinking of in my head as well,
Like 15%.
I guess
15%.
With an understanding that if it comes back higher, that it could actually be implemented or with asphalt without any input
Correct.
from us.
Yep.
Okay.
So did I get that right? So if it's over 15, it's asphalt. So we can move forward or no?
Actually, if it's over 15, it would be great if you could hold off until we could talk about it again to see what the costs are, right? But if you have to move forward before we're able to meet again in January, then that's your call.
Need to call the vote.
Second, does someone second your motion?
So there's a second. So all in favor?
Aye.
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 Opposed? None, unanimous, okay. The gate was not part of the contract, and we will not be installing one. So that's referencing the scope of the fence project. And it's my understanding, we had talked about this before. There were going to be the perimeter fencing, and we talked about specifically what the outline was going to be, and then there were going to be two fences. One, the access fence in the back, the 10-foot access fence in the back, and then a fence in the front covering the brick pathway leading towards the store.
You mean gate, right?
Yeah.
Gate,
Okay,
sorry.
just wanna make sure, yeah.
So, and that was clarified a couple times beforehand, so I was surprised to see that it was left off the contract. Do you have any?
I would like to second that, because I had multiple conversations with DPW, and this was a big issue for me because it's by the 2 to 5 area, and I was assured multiple times, and I have told many, many parents that there would be a gate on that side where the 2 to 5 area is. So I was really kind of upset when I saw this response, because I had multiple conversations where this was addressed and was assured that we'd have a gate on that side. Not a gate everywhere, just on the 2 to 5 area that goes down towards the street. So,
And just to give some color to it as well, I mean, it had come up at the public input session we held at the senior center. That was one of the suggestions from one of the parents. And it had come up a couple of other times in
It's come up a
conversations
lot with
with,
parents.
yeah. So, anyway,
Gates are not standard on playgrounds in this town, multiple reasons. The first one is, gates really play more havoc than they do anything else. They're leaned on, they're pushed on. 99% of them, they don't close properly after the way people handle them. Number two, we've never had an issue in all these years, especially with the existing Robinsons being there for almost 40 years, never had any gates. We have 2 brand new playgrounds out there without gates.
That doesn't
it's just
take back
something-
from the
it's just
fact-
something- It's what?
it doesn't take back from the fact that we were assured multiple times.
I don't remember any assurance myself personally.
It wasn't
because
through
It's
you.
not a standard thing that we do.
I know it wasn't a standard thing, that's why we had many specific conversations about it. And this is an inclusive playground, and it's supposed to,
Inclusive to what, though?
this is an inclusive playground for people with various abilities, including autism, and gates were brought up many
Aren't there
times.
other playgrounds that are inclusive to that people go on? I don't understand the difference of it.
The difference is we had conversations about it, and we had assurances of it, that's the difference.
There are some children and some issues where kids running very quickly and running off
They're
are,
everywhere.
yes.
You actually have one of the furthest distance to the street over a parking lot of almost any playground.
We're not as worried about the street. I had a child just hide in a playground. It's a huge panic moment. And it's something that brings comfort to the families to know that the gates are there. The Kids Connection Playground in Billerica not only has a gate, but a double gate, where even if the child gets through the first one, there's an area where, you know, the kid is stuck unless they can get the second gate open. So it's not something that towns haven't been moving towards. Do I think it's a little helicoptery? Yeah. In terms of the real danger is more feared than actual. But in a place where someone may be watching 3 children of 3 different ages, it does give the little extra barrier that gives the parent 10 more seconds to catch all the kids and say, oh, that one's over there trying to run out.
And I guess my concern is we're redebating something that we had agreement on. We had many conversations. I mean, we can debate this all night and the benefits of gates or not, but we had multiple conversations with people from DPW
But there also
where it
sounds-
was assured to me
sounds
that,
like
oh yes, we can have a gate on that end. There are 3 entrances. That's a lot of different escape routes. You can debate helicoptering, you can debate all the reasons for it. My concern at this point is that we were told that we would have it, and then we were told in the email, oh, it wasn't part of the contract, no, we're not doing it. And that I don't like.
So what I'm hearing you say too is expectations have been set in the community.
Yes.
Yeah,
Which is
Many, many
probably-
parents have had
probably
conversations with me about it, and I
bigger
assured them,
than-
based on my conversations with people in the DPW, that they would have a gate on the little kids section. All we're talking about is the little kids section.
Barry, is your biggest concern cost? Is it a cost issue, is it a maintenance issue?
It's a maintenance issue along with the fact that it becomes a hazard sometimes to other children when kids shut gates on other children. It's another concern that does happen with them. And number two, they've just been something that's constantly in need of repair. No matter how you slice it.
So you're
I
saying
mean,
safety?
you've already experienced there, which we have in pretty much every playground within the town of Chelmsford, probably any town. People that climb on the parts of the playground that you don't even belong on. So it's not up the stairs, it's not up the runs, it's not up the ladders, okay? It's no different that you'll find the same thing happening here. And that's exactly what's gonna start to happen to it as time goes on. Then it won't be shut, it won't be moved, it'll just be a half-open nuisance at some point in time. It's
There's a
just-
lot of things that need maintenance in the playground.
And we've, just through the years with the fact of, all the playgrounds which happen to be close to 13 or 14 in this town, gates are not a standard thing, and I have not, in my 20 years of being here, heard of any major issues as far as, a child hiding, a child's gonna hide. I'm not trying to be a negative person or give you a different thing, but,
No,
I think
but-
there's only so much that can be controlled, and
Well-
then, to your point, if you're saying there's, adult with 3 kids and you have one gate, what about the other 2? Not that I'm advocating gates, I'm just saying, so
So I think, really the bottom line, I think, is that the committee's expectations and the community's expectations are that there would be a gate there. The conversations we'd had were that would be the case, that it would be there. So what I hear you saying is that the DPW doesn't want to put a gate there, and that's clearly what Steve said as well. But I don't think that it's more of a matter of we want one and you guys don't.
And we were assured that we'd have
This
one.
is sort of another example of, I think, what we're going to deal with again with the Sandbox redesign. How can the community have their expectations met? And
I
without,
think in Roberts Field, the community has had a heck of a lot of,
well, just specifically with the gate, we're talking specifically with this gate.
everything in life has pluses and minuses to it, and it has a working group such as ourselves and yourselves to make this work. And the needs of everybody, and you saw it with the playground. If you put every piece that every person that asked for something in there, that thing would be 7 times the size and it'd be $1.7 million.
This is a straw argument. We were promised something, and now we're going back on it. That's,
Was there an illustration that showed the gate, the type of gate? I mean, 'cause what kind of gate are we talking about?
a self-closing
Is it
gate.
one-
Just a self-closing, one piece, self-closing gate.
The conversation we,
Of course it's not.
Okay, metal in terms of, I mean,
It's not a big
But
deal.
matching the
It's a gate. We could
fence,
debate this for 2
appropriate to the
hours, but it's a
fence.
fence gate.
the conversation we had, at least that I had personally had at least twice with Steve, was that the gate would be consistent with the fence, and that there would be some sort of a something that would keep it from slamming, and
Latch like-
some sort of I don't know how to call it, some sort of a thing that would keep the thing from opening or closing too quickly, so that fingers wouldn't get slammed. And he seemed to feel like that could be done.
Of course, it has what they call it's a finger usually. It has a bar at the top.
Right. So, and I get that it's going to create.
Make the gates. I'm not arguing that the gate's not made.
So, I think we understand that, your position is it's going to potentially create more maintenance. But I think the bottom line for us is that it's something that the community's asked for. It's something that we had discussed and debated.
And which appeared on the really large drawings that we have been getting for over a year.
But if
Any
you
of
guys
those
don't,
The only gate that's been on a drawing that I know of since day one is the double gate for maintenance. It's on every playground within here for that purpose.
Okay, well, we've had these conversations with Steve, and we've specifically referenced the gate prior to the contract being written.
Many times, many conversations, multiple people with Steve.
But I guess the bottom line is that if it's a matter of funding, you know, we have funds from the Friends of Roberts Field that can pay for the gate.
What is the cost,
We'd have,
$545.
okay,
including installation?
I believe that's with installation, yes.
so,
And what might be the maintenance cost over
Yearly.
the cost of,
Yearly?
for repair?
Depends on the usage of it and the abuse of it, to be honest with you. Probably in the first year, very low.
So if it's something that
Time goes on and-
we commit to coming out of the Friends of Roberts Field budget as opposed to the town budget, would that make it, I mean, it's town land, it's town property and all of that. But if we say that if the town's major rejection of this is because of the maintenance, if we would be willing to take that cost from the town, would that then make it acceptable?
It's not strictly a cost issue. It's a cost of now you're setting a precedent to probably all the playgrounds. Which now increases it all to the same point.
So we can't do anything because you're afraid that there's a precedent that's going to be set. So no one should have had the multiple conversations that we had all summer long about this gate. This should have been addressed, I don't know, 5 months ago plus when we were building the playground, when we had it already
I'm
set.
not gonna talk for Steve, because I was not part of that conversation.
Okay, but he's been our DPW representative and he promised us, I don't even know how many times we had this conversation, because it was very important to me, because it was important to many people I talked to. So, I mean, we can re-debate it, we can debate whether or not the community's had too much input on the park and whether or not debating a gate is, I think it's ridiculous, because we've had this conversation, we can all spend hours re-debating things, which we love to do in this committee apparently, but I would really like to just have a gate on the 2 to 5 area. It really shouldn't have be that big of a deal. I mean, it's a gate. We were assured we could have it. It's a gate. I don't understand why. I mean, it's become a huge issue of precedence. I mean, this isn't the Supreme Court. This is a gate on a playground.
so town manager, weigh in here, what do we do when there's a disagreement between the funding from the DPW and the funding from a private community organization?
I don't think it's a funding issue, frankly. $500 is immaterial.
Okay,
Big scheme of things. It's not a funding issue. It's a philosophical issue is what I'm hearing. And then there's this, understanding apparently that had been reached over time. And again, I'm not gonna ask you to go search your minutes or videotapes of previous meetings.
Well, many of the conversations were with Steve on the playground during construction. So they're not all going to be here because Steve stopped coming to the meetings.
If there was a way to establish an understanding that you put up the gate and reevaluate it after 3 years or something, 3 or 4 years, and if it turns out it's not, your concerns are playing out from a maintenance or other issues, that we remove it. I mean,
There's my biggest concern is that there's going to be lacrosse games. They're going, and that's near the front of the playground. And even though, we're set back really far from the street, between the lacrosse games and people moving to sporting events for the, at least a third of the year, if the determined child wants to get out, they will get out. Even with a gate, they'll jump. I had one of those.
They'll go out any of the other ones.
But,
Again, I don't think
the-
we should be even debating the benefits versus drawbacks of the gate. I think that has been done inordinately, like so many other conversations here. I don't want to waste any more of our time doing that. We have wasted so much time arguing the same points, and I know a lot of people here have people at home that they would like to be with instead of debating the same thing over and over again. I just would like when we have a promise from people in the town that they would follow through with it and not send us an email saying it wasn't part of the contract, we'll not be doing it, even though multiple people have had that conversation. I don't know, maybe we need to have officially had it in writing multiple times and find it for it to mean anything, but I'm obviously a little frustrated.
But it's the preference of the committee clearly to have a gate on the playground.
It's been voted on, I think.
And, you know, but we can do it, and the question is when, because obviously you have to order the gate. You're probably talking something that's a springtime installation. I don't know how long it's gonna take to, we'll pursue this whole gate.
Okay.
Sure we have.
We just gotta-
Discussed
yeah,
it. I can't even tell you.
Yeah, I just don't think that's gonna take tomorrow. 'Cause I don't know what the turnaround, you know, time is in terms of inventory this time of the year or the ability out there.
I don't think it's a big risk over the winter. I don't think there's gonna be a lot of 2-year-olds
All right, I
out
just don't
at
want
the
people
park
to-
this winter.
It's a game of expectations. I don't want
As
you
long as
to
we
sit here and
get the
try to
gate
where's
by the
gate?
time we have, you know, I don't know,
Next
spring.
season?
Sure.
I,
We'll get, yeah, we'll get done when everything else is.
as long as it's not, we will not be installing one is the answer.
Okay. Thank you. I asked, and this gets back to the question of hiring contractors. And Steve provided the thresholds for hiring contractors. And also made it clear, I don't know if I included that in here or not, but that the committee should not be hiring contractors. That's something that they would have to do, or that I guess a community group would have to do.
The town property is town.
Sound should be doing it.
But I mean, but a community group could hire a contractor and perform the work. I mean, that's done pretty regularly, right? With the town manager's blessing.
They could fund the work, yeah.
Right,
Yeah.
right. That's what I'm saying. If it's funded, then they can hire the contractor to do the work.
But
As
what's-
long as you're still following the procedures
Right, because it's a public facility.
of public bidding,
Right.
Okay.
which is the problem that we're having.
And I think
Go ahead.
all the stuff we're going to probably talk, the two things we'd be talking about, the gate and then the sandbox, would fit within this should fit with this under $10,000 threshold. So, which is that, as he called it, the best management business practices, right? All right. Any other questions on the updates from Steve? These are photos of the fence installation, just so folks can kind of see where, what it looks like. These were taken on November 5th. The one on the lower left, you can see that's the 10-foot access gate. The upper right-hand corner is the corner where of the natural play area, and that still needs to be graded. I don't think I have a photo. Actually, the photo on the lower right-hand side is my back would be to where the gate is. So you can use
Is
your
that where-
imagination.
Is there now a lower bar in that corner? But, yeah, the corner you can't see, do you know? Because I know that, I'm trying to find a picture, when I was at the park, which was closer to when the gate was installed, there was no, you know, the bottom metal bar that usually is on the gating, there was no lower bar in that corner up near, again, where the gate would be built, and again, I'm trying to
Oh,
find
I don't
a
know.
picture.
I can check and see and take a picture and bring it back for January.
Because there was quite a gap under that, and I don't know if that involves the grading, I assume, to a degree, but there was also just no, I don't know, it was like the metal bar was missing in that area.
Where the gate is? Where the gate is missing?
That corner by the oak tree,
Where the gate's missing? That corner?
Yeah.
In there? Yeah, I don't know, but
it was right on the side where the giant tree is.
I can take a picture and bring it back for the next meeting, if you like. But the two areas that still need to be graded are the area in this top right, and then the area in the front of the playground, which is sort of, it's the top left corner over there. That still needs to be graded. Any questions on this? Sandbox redesign, rebuild?
I don't have to like stand right.
No.
Uh-oh, what happened?
So the last time we we met, we discussed the issues surrounding the sandbox. 4 main issues that were identified, and just going through them really quickly, were the slippery sidewalks that are bordering the sandbox, from the overflow from the bordering edge, the flooding from the rainwater and the lack of drainage, lack of seating, which has been problematic for parents standing over their kids watching them, and then the lack of shade, which we had agreed to discuss more in depth after we saw the impact from the shade structure that we're waiting to install, but I included it just because it fits within the scope of what we're discussing. So the slippery sidewalks due to sand, I guess, you know, from what I can tell, and we probably need more input from DPW, but there are a few potential solutions. One of them would be to move the sandbox a little bit in its current position to allow for a border around it. So it would require a few things: digging a new sandbox area, adding grass between the sidewalk, relocating the black border to expand to fit around the entire sandbox. So, which is a minimal cost. I think you said it was around $40 per piece of that black border. Yeah. So we would be able to reuse some of it that is currently there, and then would have to purchase additional materials to surround the entire sandbox. And we would need to move both diggers, probably re-pour cement to include the handicap accessible digger. Based on the measurements that I took, and these are informal measurements in the freezing cold with, it was a little dark because I did it after work, but based on those measurements, it's reasonable to assume that we could fit, if we moved it to what we're looking at to be to the right, we could fit this in and still include a border between the sidewalk and the sandbox, making the hazard of the slippery sand better, in my opinion. There would be a buffer zone. Kids would get the sand off their feet from the grass before they get onto the sidewalk. Yeah, I mean, so
Can I ask
that's,
a question, Nikki?
yeah.
What are you thinking of for material for the border? I mean, it looks sandy, looking at the picture, but
I would just say grass, fill in grass. Well, you would need to include some type of plastic border, which is already there, which are already present on one side where the grass already is, so you would just essentially be replicating it on the other side of the sandbox. Replicating that grass border and replicating the black border that's already in place.
And the grass has been pretty much trapping the sand from getting into the sidewalk closest to the play structures, so it seems like that's an effective way to keep it in.
So if you look at it on the other side, there isn't any sand at all, which is safe to assume that that probably would help alleviate some of the problem. I don't think it would be perfect by any means, but
yeah, my concern about the sand, and I have zero experience, about the grass, and I have zero experience, but it would seem like with the activity, and I think once you make this change, you're gonna find the sandbox is a lot more popular, and you're gonna have a lot more kids playing that, and the traffic alone could just kill that sand, and now you end up with
kill the grass, you mean?
kill the grass, and then you end up with a mud.
Well,
We were also discussing putting seating around it, right?
And mud works too.
you have to, right?
What's that?
Mud works
But
too.
those trap sand.
Really?
Yeah.
I mean, I think we've probably seen the peak of popularity for that sandbox. I mean, it's just
Yeah, I don't
incredible
think
the
it's
amount
gonna
of usage it
necessarily-
gets. It's probably one of the biggest draws as far as my child's age group
Yes.
to the playground. So I would think it's safe to assume that we've probably seen as much usage as it's gonna get at one time, but I could be wrong. And I think that anytime you have grass and sand near each other, sand has the potential of killing grass. It's just how it goes. But it's better than someone slipping and falling and hitting their head on the sidewalk near the swing sets, in my opinion.
Skinning their knees.
Right.
Yeah.
I also
Which I've
think
seen.
having the level of the sand lower than it is now, and, so that there's a good amount, 4 to 6 inches of border exposed, will help keep the sand in its place as well.
Does
So-
anyone know how deep the sand is right now?
I think it's between 16 and 18 inches. Right? Does that seem right? But the problem is that it's, let's call it 18 inches. It's 18 inches, but then the stuff that's underneath it is all compacted down, so it kind of acts like a bowl, and it just holds the water in place. And that's really true for
That's
all
the
of
biggest
the-
issue.
all of the area, the dirt, the soil, and the playground. It's just so compacted down from being used over the years.
You do have to remember one thing, and this this has been happening not only in the Sandbox, but there are a lot of the drop zones off of the equipment, like when you come down the slide. If you were out there during the peak of all this rain, pretty much everything was wet. It's been 21 inches, which is way past the norm of what you're getting in rain. So after a while, there's really nowhere for the water to go until, you know, you start to get dry days and you start to dissipate it.
Yeah, but it was bad very soon
Oh, no,
after.
I know exactly. I know
Okay.
exactly.
It's compaction.
Yeah, I know what it is. As a matter of fact, I mean, if you really wanna talk about this, I mean, I think a way to take care of this for a very inexpensive way and to do it would be to move the Sandbox up to the corner where the fence is and the tree, if you wanna look at that. I think it does two things. It puts you at a higher level of the ground that you're at, number one, which should take care of part of that. Number two, I think it'll give you the ability to get down a little more like you want to and expose more border. I'm not sure it's gonna help you much here. And the problem with this now is if you wanna add drainage, you're talking about going under your sidewalk, in between your, swings and your other thing, behind the fence and out and down, which probably a $7,000 or $8,000 cost to itself, but even more than that, I think it's inhibiting other parts of your playground, especially where you're gonna get in with equipment to do it. And that would leave that area for either a new piece of equipment, maybe a second, shade structure, you know, opposite the other one, as a possibility.
I mean, that upper corner was our grassy area. The idea was to have a grassy area enclosed within the,
It's a pretty good sized area, it's not bad.
Can
and
I,
it was also, it would need to be right on the path where it's not handicapped accessible.
And frankly, we're gonna have the same compaction issues there because water pools there as well. So I don't
Right up
see,
here in the corner?
yeah, it does.
Yeah.
It's all compacted there as well.
can I show you guys, just a picture to explore something that's similar to what Gary said, but
Sure.
fixed in place? I mean, that's just raising it up like that. Just putting it up. Now, I don't know, Bill, you and I talked about this at one point.
Yeah, it doesn't really address the compaction issues, though.
What is it?
But if it gets the sand
like a
up,
sandbox
so now it's
in this
instead of
backyard,
being this level, it's up here,
Oh,
could drain out.
just building
the water
up.
can
Share
drain
that with Elizabeth.
Or, here, please, thanks. Yeah, I mean, that's more common.
An ability for a little weed design underneath it.
That's a good point. So
When you move it.
I don't wanna get ahead,
You
Nikki.
could do a bed, you could do a little bit of a bed under it, yes. Yeah, that's a typical sandbox.
do you wanna keep going through that?
Yeah, so
Yeah.
All right, Barry, can
Okay.
you give us the floor, please?
This-
Do you
I
want to move the
forget
next
where I
slide?
was. Hold on. Next slide, please.
This one.
Are we there?
Yeah.
All right, so I guess we're dealing with what potential solutions, not including, at this point, not including a total move of the sandbox, just so we know what we're dealing with. One of the thoughts I had was to install a buffer around the entire sandbox, not moving it, but just using that black plastic edging to create a border between the sidewalk and the sandbox. This wouldn't necessarily solve any drainage issue, but if we're dealing just the sand, my thought is that we could make it a little bit lower, and kids would have to step up, get the sand off their feet. It wouldn't have any wind blowing in sand onto the sidewalk, and that would help reduce the sand that gets on to that sidewalk. But,
It would have to be a full curb height.
right. So that was another thought I had. So the drainage issue. This was the last picture I took of the sandbox. I would say this is probably late November. That's the worst I've ever seen it personally. And someone came up to me as I was taking pictures of it and said, "Have you ever seen a sandbox like that before?" And I said, "Well, no."
Yeah.
I actually saw it somewhat worse than this
Yeah.
one day, but yeah, it's just bad.
So,
But-
I mean, obviously we're dealing with one of the worst rainfall seasons I can remember in the fall. So we're sort of dealing with the worst. It could be, knock on wood, I don't know. I mean, I don't know how it could get any worse than this was. And all of the fields, all of the areas are wet. But I do think based on the observation from the first few rainstorms, it's not usable, and honestly, it's miserable trying to keep a 2-year-old away from that.
I will
So,
second that.
and it also is a hazard, when you have deep enough water that a child can get near to, in a playground. So in my opinion, that's one of the biggest reasons for fixing it. I mean, just saying not to go near it when it's like that, and, I mean, it's sort of a hazard in my opinion.
And I'd like to add to that, there were some bigger kids making a very deep hole in the water, and you would have kids breaking ankles because you couldn't see that there was a deep hole underneath, and they literally dug down probably a foot. And the only reason I knew that is because I watched them do it, and I asked them to put sand back in afterwards so that no one, went down in it.
And the other thing this picture shows too is sort of the areas that the sand tends to spill over into. I think sort of making it an island inside of the grass would seem to solve that issue, but we'd obviously have to move the diggers. Can I ask you if is it I'm not an engineer. Is it possible to dig down? Huh?
No, am I.
Oh, but you deal with them, or you play with on TV. Is it possible to dig down through compacted soil, like with? Is it possible to scoop out the sand? Let's say you take out 24 inches of what's in there now, all right, and then go in with a post hole digger and drill down another 3 feet to break that up, and then do that in several different areas, and then backfill that in with some sort of a larger stone that would.
Well, that's what I was saying, if we moved it, that would be one of the suggestions I would have, to do a stone base.
Couldn't we do that here?
Well, your problem here is you're gonna be disturbing everything around you, trying to work with all that equipment. You're gonna be driving over your sidewalks with machinery, you're gonna be driving over with trucks of stone. That's part of the issue, and then the other thing you will have to remember is you'll be doing more than adding to your border, you'll be doubling it, because technically it's gonna need to be too high to leave the exposure that you want to.
Okay.
Can be done, and your idea is very good, because sandboxes, as you know, are not usually that much, but there's probably a good 6 inches minimum in the average sandbox that's built, and then the way they usually do it is they cap it with a flat piece of wood, and the reason for that is for someone to sit.
Right.
Right, which we were
while,
discussing.
While the kids are playing, so it does 2 things. It's so you're not sitting there with your legs straight out because the sand's up to the top of the box, and secondly, it does give you that, that little bit of extra if you are holding some water.
Is there a reason that it wasn't done like that?
To my knowledge only.
Because we were kind of shocked that it was.
As far as I know, when this all started, at the beginning, there was no sandbox, and then I know when it came about, I'm not even sure how the location came about versus where it would have been personally, is all I'm saying. And you're sort of in probably the middle of the whole thing, which again.
Well, I mean, the nice thing is you can sit.
Another spot of retention of water, probably higher than some others within the land, typical of any land.
Right.
Yeah.
I mean, the nice thing about putting it in the middle and functionally in terms of a playground is that you can sit with your little one there and watch the older ones in any
Right.
portion of the playground.
But I actually kind of stood where I was talking about, and the good news is you're still with all your young equipment where you are, and you got quite the view of it.
So do you guys, I wasn't here when you guys initially discussed this project, but do you have a cost breakdown of what it costs to put the sandbox where it is right now? Or is it just
To put it where it is,
where it is?
what do you
So
mean it costs?
just
The
how much
original
how much
cost?
it cost
Oh, no.
altogether?
Was it like 3K? What am I thinking? Yeah.
I'm just
Honestly,
I'm wondering how much it would cost to put it in a new location as opposed to digging down, replacing it with rocks, or installing a drainage. I'm just curious.
It would be a lot less because of the fact that I don't think we're gonna disturb and ruin anything within the existing playground if it's moved.
So how are you going to
Because
get
of
the
where it
sand?
is.
But you're
How
still
are you
gonna have
going
to
to get
dig
all
out.
that stuff
I
out?
am gonna have to get it out, yes.
So how
mean-
you'd have to get
Oh,
stuff
but
in there to
then
get it
then
out
I'm
either
doing
way.
that with that very small John Deere
With a
which is
Bobcat,
not-
right.
Which is not the way well, even Bobcats, the way they turn, it's not more of your ideal thing. So, I mean, I would be taking a heck of a lot more care of how I get that out of here.
Having gone through the process of the natural play area that we went through, they were pretty much able to kind of go through a specified section of the sidewalk to do the work. I think you could still take that same tack with this. You might end up damaging two sections of the sidewalk, but you know, those were damaged in the installation part too and repaired. So I think it's, you know, I hear what you're saying, that it's going to be more problematic. But I think from the discussions we've had in the past on the location being in the middle and the benefits there and sort of the continuity that it brings to the playground, my personal opinion is that it should stay where it is. And because I see you're still going to have the same drainage issues as in the front. You're basically just saying, okay, I'm going to dig this out and fill it in with dirt versus dig this out and fill it in with drainage, you know, some sort of drainage positive solution, and then build another one, you know, or build another one over here. And I haven't heard anybody say anything about wanting to add more equipment. I haven't heard that from anyone. So I don't see it as a benefit to having the space open to add more stuff in the middle, because we really wanted the middle open. The other thing that we haven't really talked about is that if we do move it to the front, we're going to have to add more sidewalk, because one of the nice things about this is that having it in the middle makes it inclusive for people in wheelchairs and mobility
I mean,
issues to get
that's
to.
what I was saying, yeah. That you'd have to have it right up on the sidewalk, or you'd have to build a sidewalk to it.
Question, so in terms of getting rid of the water, you can dig down, form drainage. And the other idea is you develop a wall, say elevate the actual sandbox itself. What's the downside of the ladder? Because I mean, if this was my backyard and my kids, that's just the way I would solve it. I would get the thing up like a raised garden kind of effect. And that way, you know, that takes care of all the drainage. The water simply drains out.
And you have
of
an
that corner.
inclusivity problem.
Yeah, so
Yeah.
if we're
You
dealing,
can't-
if that's a limitation that we have, that it has to be inclusive, which to me, that seems like that's the direction we wanna go in, right? That would
It's
sort
not
of
like
take.
a table height, we're just talking about it.
Yeah, but if someone in a
Right.
wheelchair who can wheel right up to the edge of that, where that digger is right there,
Right, that's
or
the-
wheel onto the sand, that's what essentially makes it inclusive, right?
Right.
You won't wheel onto the sand at all if you
No.
can lower the sand in the box as well, correct?
We're not talking about wheeling onto the sand, we're talking about wheeling up to like
Yeah,
the
either
digger.
way, you'd be able to do what he's saying, wheel up to it.
Yeah, I mean, you can make it a tapered ramp up, you don't have to build a little vertical wall. I mean, you can let the approach still be, put your grass in there and still slope it up gently.
It's not necessarily the slope, it's the wheelable surface. Having the concrete there makes it easier for someone who's using wheels or is on crutches, and that way you've got the nice, even, flat surface, as opposed to grass that becomes a little wavy and,
Or even a small ramp.
um,
That? I mean, you figure that they're going up into not the next place, but the other equipment that's got the big ramp that wheelchairs can go in. You could even have just a small ramp so that wheelchairs could,
Can we back up to your slide where you showed the old and the new, when you moved it?
Oh,
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so if you extended the sidewalk, is that what you've done to make it inclusive there?
It already exists like that.
yeah, there's just the semicircle
That
of
semicircle.
concrete for inclusivity to hold the digger and to
So are
be
you moving
inaccessible.
that particular digger or not in that design?
Both the diggers would have to be moved, yeah, because the one that's, the non-accessible one is, would be too close to the sidewalk.
Yeah, no, I'm worried about the accessible.
The accessible one would have to be moved at least to the point of that little arch, but probably I would say would probably be best suited if that was pushed further out, because that would give less area for the sand to wash back on the sidewalk. I don't think it would have to be a a tremendous amount of concrete added to it, but at least some. But at the very least, it would need to be moved to that point.
And I can see raised borders on at least two sides of this for
Right.
raising the height. And just as long as the digger can reach down enough from where it is, so that the kid can effectively play.
Yeah, I don't think that digger is designed so that you'd be able to reach over any sort of wall. That digger is designed where the arms come just about straight out, and there's probably like, I don't know, 4 inches, I'm making this up. I don't think there's any way you're gonna be able to effectively reach over a wall with that.
No, I don't think there's, there would be a wall there, but it would be lower. If the digger can reach that low, because the sand will be not up to its current height. Correct?
Correct. If that's, with the design that you're talking, yes, it wouldn't be.
Or the concrete could be slightly ramped down.
You're not supposed to sit on anything ramped.
No.
Okay.
When you're at a standstill, you're
Okay.
supposed to be flat,
Okay,
for safety of the wheelchair, is what I'm saying.
right.
What is the height differential we would be permitted for another level rather than ramp for a sitting area there? So that there'd be the approach that stays concrete, and then another concrete pad that's just a little bit lower by, whatever is permitted, so that then the digger can,
Whatever you lower it at, it's 1 in 10. So that means now you have to ramp 1 in 10 to get to that height.
Which puts it out in the middle
Which is
of the.
gonna take away probably space, whether it's 2 feet, 7 feet, 10 feet.
okay.
Not to mention, that's
That's
where
the
water's
law.
gonna
Yeah,
pool,
exactly.
water
We're
goes
gonna
down,
get right
yeah.
back in
The
the,
question
Yeah.
Yeah.
is that anything you lower a half of inch,
Mhm.
okay, then it's 1 in 10, so it's a half
Yeah.
of that.
Okay.
Okay, so that's your issue. I mean, the only other way I can look at this is if you did that and you were able to raise it slightly and the digger did work, do you just allow for a little more sand on that end? Where that is.
I mean, the other
You know what
thing,
I'm saying? And then start to gradually bring your level down so the rest of it's hanging at 6 inches or 8 inches that you're looking to be below.
so are we talking about lowering the level of the sand instead of raising the edge to put seating on it anyway?
No, I don't think so.
I think you're really talking about both.
Right.
You have to, unless you do full drainage, which I really think is kind of absurd based on where you are now in the project and what it can hurt, then you have to come up with another solution, which is to soften the grade, maybe add some stone, which again, we'll have to have an engineer give us a little more knowledge on and make sure. And then if you did that, so now you've changed your base, which has nothing to do with your sand.
Right.
You're still not up to sand. Now, when you go to put it back, if you double boarded it and you kept it down 6 or 8 inches, I think that's gonna take care of your sand leaving the box and getting on the sidewalks regardless of being in the middle and having grass on each side. Grass on each side would help probably more, but what I'm saying is your ability to keep it in is gonna be greater already, just by doing that.
So that would solve both problems, basically.
Excuse me?
That would help to solve
Well,
both
hopefully,
problems.
yeah.
But I think I think whatever solution we come to, the best solution would be to solve both of these problems with the same solution,
Right.
in my opinion.
Could I poll you guys to see what your feelings are about keeping the location the same versus moving it to the front corner?
I really, it doesn't bother me having, and I'll just be honest, having it in a different location. If the cost was less, it wouldn't bother me.
I think,
Oh,
oh, sorry.
I'm sorry.
Go ahead.
I agree. If it's, makes sense, cost-wise, I say move it. I have no issue either way, if it makes sense keeping it.
I guess I have two concerns with moving it, which is, one, it's nice to have it in the middle, as I already expressed. When you have a little kid and then you can see your older kid run wherever they are, you have an eye on them. Whereas if you put it in that front corner, well, I got 3 issues with this actually. You put it in that front corner, you're not gonna be able to see the back of the park, with the trees and everything. 2, you have the accessibility issue. You're either putting it right up against the brick or you're building a new walkway to it, which is a whole different issue. And then you're only going to build, I mean, the accessibility is going to be, I don't know, that's a whole different level of accessibility issues where you either have to build the walkway, which is a whole different thing. And I'm trying to think of what my third was. I think that I can't see moving it being that much more cost effective when you're gonna have to dig this out and then refill it. If you're gonna have to dig it out, another one, and fill that along with digging this out and refilling it, right? You have to dig out 2 spaces and fill them with something, as opposed to digging out the current space and refilling it with something.
But I'm not going deep at all in the common space, if I'm doing that. I'm just getting down the sand, moving the sand, bringing in a little bit of loam, and I'm done. Here.
Right, but it's still something.
That's the difference.
But that's
But you're
over and
still gonna have to
above
dig deep in
doing
the other one.
Same work.
Can I offer something on
did you
that?
say?
Just
You
might
don't think?
help this whole discussion?
Can we just finish can I get the feedback real quick? Okay,
I'll make sure you get to it, because I feel like.
all right,
There's no possibility that this would be done before winter.
Right.
Either way.
Right.
So
right.
why don't you let us cost it out?
Well, that's why I wanted to get their feedback,
Well, why
so,
don't you let us cost it out both ways, moving it, leaving it, then you get to see it. The only other thing I can offer at this point in time is if you wanna try to use it a little more, I could probably bring a little more sand in and build it up, so it's mounded slightly.
Which is only gonna increase our sand on the sidewalk
Well,
issue.
But again, it's up to you, if you rather just let it go, you know, knowing that basically, at some point in time, it's gonna be snow and it's pretty much over, you know, for the year, or I can offer that up as well as where, and I didn't mean to jump in the middle, but I mean, where there's a time frame here of a winter, I think coming back with a couple of plans and just having a cost would be a little easier.
Definitely.
Could we get a cost, I don't know, this is just my 2 cents, if we put, I'm sorry, I have the picture up on here. If we put a double, you know, whatever, build up the black area, like you were saying, and put a seat on it type thing. If we put that on this side and this side and this side, that would cover the majority of the sand area without moving it, without, that at least keeps the sand from fleeing the area. It doesn't, how difficult would it be to install the black stuff where there's sand already, just on the other 2 sides?
If that's all you wanna do?
I mean, at least that solves the seeding and the sand issue to me. It doesn't solve any of the drainage issue, but,
No.
yeah, and it's double work right now. Did you have any thoughts on keeping it in the location or moving it to the front? Danielle?
Oh, me. I should never ask. I would say it really depends on cost here, because I don't want to throw good money, you know, like if the project just, it didn't go the way, sometimes you just got to pull out and start again rather than keep chasing it. It is nice to have it in the middle, but it's not a be-all, end-all by any means. It is a numbers game.
I think my having been on the Roberts Field Advisory Committee kind of gives me a slightly different viewpoint in that we know drainage for the entire property is an issue. We know it's a problem for the baseball fields, we know it's gonna be a problem for the lacrosse field. And I think that even if we move the sandbox to the front, drainage is gonna be an issue. So I think that whatever plans you come up with need to have some sort of drainage, I can't come up with the word, where, remediation.
and
Underneath, whether it's in the front of the park or where it is. It's just a matter of how extensive it needs to be based on the compaction there and based on the height level of the property.
That cannot be made perfect.
I
Definitely be made
understand
better,
that.
And that's one of the things that I'm trying to say, and I believe the movement of it makes it better because of the fact that how we're starting out, where we're working at, what our possibilities of doing that we may not be able to accomplish here.
How are you gonna get into that
That's
area
easy.
with the heavy equipment, with
Huh?
the, how are you gonna be able to get to that area with the heavy equipment, with the fencing the way it is? Any better than?
Roll back the fencing for a while.
10-foot gate.
But you gotta go across, every load you take in and take out, you have to go
Through the
across
bricks.
all of these sidewalks and poured in place to get,
Right,
know
you
what I mean?
either have to go through the entire playground from the back 10-foot gate, which means you'll have to go through this
Peel
area.
back fence and put it back?
Right.
Okay, I guess I remember the
It's
other,
not common either.
So,
so,
what's,
sorry,
sorry.
can I just ask a quick question? Were you, when you were thinking about it being up there, are you thinking about it abutting the brick?
No, I didn't think so.
So were you considering a new walkway?
It would have to be, yeah.
Yeah.
You have to have a walkway.
So how long do you think it would take to put together some options?
I don't know. I'd actually have to talk to Stephen Scott. to be
Okay,
honest with you.
maybe, probably not for the next meeting, but maybe
I wouldn't
2
think
months?
so.
Maybe by
Yeah.
February?
I would think probably, yeah.
So can you, is it possible for you to put together some cost estimates and some ideas of how you would address it in its current location, given the discussion we've had tonight and the
Pros
things,
and cons, sure.
well, costs?
Well, that's part of the cost.
Yeah, and it should include
You know what I'm
drainage remediation in both places.
Yeah, to the extent that it can be done, is what
Right.
you're saying.
And the
That's why
walkway?
I say pros and cons. I'm
Right.
talking about the drainage and the cost of it.
Right.
And the walkway and the fencing?
But if you're
and
gonna
everything?
be-
Not to how and where you'd want to use it.
R-
You know what I'm saying?
No, I
Being
didn't
in
quite follow that.
Location in the middle versus location
Right.
at the end.
Right.
That's not what I'm gonna come, that's not the approach I'm gonna come from.
Right, but you're gonna come from costs, and so your cost estimate, or your pros and cons will include the cost estimate of the pathway to it along with,
Yes, along with the fact of, could you do the same thing here as you can do there because of your restrictions?
well, I mean, we know you
Based on
can't
how
do the
far
same
down
thing.
You're gonna go, what you're trying to do, and what you're trying to accomplish. That's
Right.
all.
I mean, personally, because I know that the lacrosse field is going to need is all in this grand plan of improving the drainage for the property.
Yep.
That if the sandbox were going to be moved to the front, that whatever remediation is for the field and the track that we plan to be putting in, that it be extended over that little bit to also handle anything for the new spot for a proposed sandbox, because it will fit in with that plan then, and it's not a matter of then whatever drainage pipes ending there at the fence, and now under the sandbox becomes a collection point. And it should also include the raised seating area for at least 2 sides.
Is that the benches?
Well-
Let's let Jen finish, because I think she has some ideas about seating.
Well, you were talking about in terms of a sandbox, that if you had the,
What am I saying?
the edges boxed in with a flat top, it could then be a seating area. That's what I'm talking
You
about.
said that, and I was like,
Maybe I'm
oh.
moving
I was like,
ahead.
oh,
I don't know.
Jenny?
You were talking earlier about benches and pads that are supposed to go in, correct?
Yes.
Okay.
But my mind's.
Is that around this, or is that somewhere else, is all I'm asking?
Are you talking about the benches?
Yes.
The benches are separate from the sandbox. The benches we've been discussing were a separate issue.
Can we go back really quick, just before we move on to seating, go back to the slide, a few slides back, just so we can talk about it really quick.
It's like she
In
has all these
context.
slides we haven't discussed right now.
Just in relation to the drainage of the sandbox, we had discussed the shade issue, and how hot it gets in the sandbox. So I included this slide, and Adding a shade structure, in my opinion, would eliminate direct rainfall onto the sandbox. Obviously, it would not assist in rainfall coming in at an angle. The height that it would need to be would not allow for that, and we discussed the limitations of shade in that location based on where the sun is positioned. Obviously, it's not perfect, but I just want to make sure we considered, or at least spoke about, adding something to cover it. That picture there that you see is the shade structure at Springsburg Park in Bedford, which is the town I work for, and I was part of the plan of implementing these on the beach. And from experience, I can say that it does keep it dry underneath those. Dry enough that water definitely does not pool. It's not the same grading as the sandbox, but I just wanted to say that it would keep it a little bit dry. But if you notice, this picture was taken, I would say probably first thing in the morning around 8 a.m. And the shade is not directly underneath the shade structure. So, if we're talking in relation to shade, it's not perfect, it's not direct shade underneath the sandbox, is what we would be trying to solve. But it could help with the rainfall onto the sandbox. And I only included it because I know that we had discussed the shade issue on the playground and thinking it could potentially eliminate some drainage issues. In a normal season where we didn't get as much rain as we did, it's just something else to consider.
But it's a split thing too, right? Because if you have water that gets in there, you're not gonna have the same amount of,
Evaporation.
that's the word I'm looking for. Yeah, that one.
These were, just so you know, these were installed by O'Brien and Sons.
Do we go to the next slide?
Next, I think we discussed everything in the next few slides. We were skipping ahead to seating. All these things were just brought up in the conversation. So ideally for me, the seating, we would include seating in this plan because it's been something people have been talking about. Every person's mentioned it to me. I mention it to myself every time I'm there. I wish I could sit down somewhere. So most informal feedback has stated that people want seating. The ideal place for me would be on the grass between the side, and let's just assume that everything's staying the same, the sandbox staying the same. Even if we moved it, I think seating is important. Can you go to the next slide, please? The types of seating, I think it would be best to have consistency with what we already have at the park. So, these benches, in my opinion, are minimal cost to the benefit that they would have to this sandbox. But also, if we were talking about raising the sides a little bit, I think it would also solve a seating issue. And we wouldn't have to invest money in seating if we were already investing money in raising up the side of the side of the sandbox. So
I think I support raising the side of the sandbox and adding some seating level on that as opposed to discrete seats. And I really don't want to have granite stones in the middle of the edge or the edge of the sandbox, just because it's a very unstable surface for small kids, and that's a very good head injury waiting to happen or not waiting to happen.
definitely.
So you're understanding, when you put seating on a sandbox, you're usually in what's considered a child height seat.
Okay.
Like if you go to an elementary school with
Mhm.
20 of children's
Yes.
events and you're sitting in one of those, it's not as comfortable as you would like.
At least your-
with our age
At least
and
your bum
size.
isn't in the
No,
wet
I
sand.
understand, but I just
That's,
want people to understand, and then you got, this 24-inch surface and the sand's way down there.
no.
But yeah, no.
No, I think I'd be happier if my 2-year-old went to try to sit on it and it wasn't,
Right.
Two-
yeah,
2 feet above the cement itself.
We're gonna sit there and
Yeah.
watch.
Yeah.
It'll be comfortable, but it's not gonna be chair comfortable.
Most
Even-
of us who are familiar
Okay.
with having 2-year-olds are familiar with sitting on things way too small.
Yeah, but even in like participation, you want to participate, but you
Exactly.
can't
but
just.
if you're bringing us numbers, this way we're including
Oh,
the
no,
same,
I'm following.
the same thing at both spaces. And I think even when we don't have to worry about sand spilling onto a walkway, I think that we would have preferred the original design to include that sitting area around the sandboxes and for the sand to be lower than
In
the
relation to
top
the-
of
yeah.
whatever level that it can escape easily.
Okay, either next slide or?
This was a repeat slide from a previous meeting about shade. I don't know if we were ready to get back into that conversation, but since we're talking about the sandbox, so we're cognizant of the price of eventually what it would end up costing us. I included it just so we could see it again. I don't know if moving the location of the sandbox within the playground would help the shade issue
It
at all.
would because of the tree that's here.
Right, so,
We'll also get a lot more leaves from that tree in the sandbox if we move it up into the,
it
that
seems
area.
just so exposed, where it is right now, which is a good thing for watching your children, but also for the sun, it's just very, very hot.
True, true.
and again, once the shade structure that we already have purchased that isn't up goes in, I think we will have a much better idea of what additional shade we need to add, because I think that will make I mean, as you pointed out with that other picture, the shade is not underneath the shade structure for a good portion of time, so I
Right.
think we'll see. Like, I think it's in the morning that the shade from the shade structure should be over the sandbox, right? That
And I
makes sense?
think if we're willing to be a little bit patient and keep to the naturalized concept for the park, that there is also a plan for planting some trees at certain, at distances, so that when they grow to a particular height in about 5 to 8 years, they will then shade the sandbox from all 3 sides not currently shaded. But those trees would be further back enough as to not change the play area. And if people are just willing to be patient and maybe, their oldest kids aren't gonna benefit and they're not gonna benefit while their oldest kids are there, maybe they'll see the benefit with younger kids or when their kids are babysitting other kids.
I mean, I
But
think
it-
in the morning we should have some decent, I'm not sure how much, because I haven't seen angles and whatever, shade from, in the morning, at least on half or the closer corner of the sandbox. And if we do put a tree on the other side, I think we're talking about, we will eventually, like you say, although we'll have more leaves in the sandbox, we will also have more shade for the,
No, the idea is the trees are so far back that their height will block the angle of the sun. And the trees aren't right near the sandbox or right over the sandbox, so they're not getting any leaves in it.
I would argue that if it's big enough, there's not that much distance between there will be leaves, it's fine, but I agree that there will be shade. My point is, I am agreeing, there will be shade from that side with trees, there will be shade from the other side with the shade structure we've already purchased. I think we may need to address it with another shade structure, but I think we should see
Definitely.
whenever we actually get the shade structure that we already have purchased up, what difference that makes.
I think that the beating that it's taken this fall in the short amount of time that it's been in use is probably the immediate issue that we
Yeah.
would need to try to solve. But
So I think our next steps are that you're going to come back to us in a couple of months, a couple of meetings, February maybe?
Talk to Stephen, Scott, and we're gonna start to develop, what it would be like, and hopefully, I would think, in a couple of months, it should be doable, but I will check with them and make sure you get an email.
Okay, so, and that discussion that you're going to provide to us is going to include the specifications that we've asked for, correcting the drainage, correcting the outflow of sand, and adding seating.
Yeah, I believe it's probably, in my opinion, but I'm not gonna weigh in 100% until I'm with Steve and Scott and get it, but I would think it might even change the whole way the sandbox is built. I'm not sure you'd end up using the black border, or if you're just gonna build it as a wooden sandbox and put your seating on the top.
Yeah.
No matter which location it is, which still doesn't change your drainage.
Well, we're gonna
That has
need,
to be done first, but I'm just saying that might be one solution to a portion of it.
Do you know how the black stuff was,
Huh?
Do you know how the- Do you know-
Basic.
do you know how the black stuff was chosen? Because I don't,
Yeah, that's standard around most playgrounds, it's a playground structure border.
right,
It's done that way for multiple reasons. One, It's an easy interlock, section. Number two, if you ever looked at the side of it, it has the numbers on it, which gives you the reading, which helps you when you're trying to make sure your mulch is staying at the levels that you need. It's relatively inexpensive to some other issues. Years ago, it was always 4x4s, which are great at the beginning, but then they start to splinter
Right.
and do wear out. So that's mainly the development of that, and it's used around most of them. I've seen it used both ways when it comes to sandboxes. The problem with sandboxes is you can probably leave here now and go to 10 communities and come back with 10 different pictures
Sure.
of what a sandbox is. You'll see some with nothing around it. It's like just sunk down in a little with no borders.
I mean, there
Some
used to be
more
the sand
elaborate-
pit in the back of Roberts Field, right? Where
Yeah,
that's
no,
right.
no, no, I'm
We
just
just
saying
used to
it's
play in the
one of
pile
those-
of sand
It's
back
one of those
there.
ones, unlike equipment, that are more defined as to, this is basically the standard way of building one.
I guess most of the ones that I'd seen, if it was built with seating
Well,
or
that's-
raised size. That was my question, was
Usually
the,
they're not that big in size on average. They're.
So you guys are gonna come back to us, hopefully by February, with estimated cost and solutions for those
They've
things.
been in a movement,
Having it
Okay.
in place here, and then having it over here.
yes.
And both will include some sort of solution for the accessibility for
Well, I
one
think-
digger.
I think, honestly, my personal opinion, and I'll get read from ADA as well, I think your only solution to the accessibility, whether you leave it or move it, is that the person ends up at the end of your existing concrete, wherever it is,
Mhm.
at level height, and we're gonna have to build up the sand in that end of the box a little higher.
As long as
to make it
that's
work properly.
included in the design
Yeah, 'cause
costs,
I
that's,
don't see how you're gonna lower the person
Right.
without getting yourself into a whole nother ADA regulation of being on level surface, and every time you drop an inch, it's a foot.
we
Right.
can't just leave that one end open and have the sides up, because that's kind of what I was,
When you say leave it open, the sides up,
well, the way it is now, it's all open, right?
yeah, so you're saying.
So I'm
don't
talking
put
about building
anything
up-
Right there.
I'm talking about building up the side by the swings and the side by the large structure.
Yes.
So you have two sides that have seating, you have the end that's open where you have accessibility, you have the end that's open where there's sand, which, I mean, with various grass where it
Yeah,
doesn't cause a
yeah.
problem. Then you block the sand from getting on the sidewalks on either side, you have seating on either side, and you still have accessibility on the end. That's how I see it, but
So
that's
your
my,
only loss of sand could be right there,
right. And then the only question
is
is,
what you're saying.
if we added more concrete, if we built that in a little farther, if there's concerns that it's still too close, you built that in a little farther, you wouldn't have the sand, even if you have the sand escape, it won't escape as
far onto the
far
walkway.
off into the walk. So I think it showed on the, I was pointing out original, where is the slide?
So if you build it in, you are gonna have to put borders on the two sides.
Right, so I guess what I was talking about is, you have a border on this side.
Yes.
You have a border on this side like you do, and maybe you have most of a border on this side, but you still have this loop open,
With the
right?
black border,
With the black border.
Right.
You'd still need this, you'd need this corner raised to stop the sand from escaping this way, but, and then I was saying, if you built this cement structure longer, so it goes in a little bit more, so that there is less, the sand doesn't get to the edge of the actual walkway.
So
As
if you
much.
do that, two things have to happen. It has to be double the width, because it needs to be able to turn around versus backing out per the lot. And you
Right.
probably have to border the two sides, so he's not gonna fall over to it. You know what I'm saying? So your front, where your digger would stay open completely, and you'd have to widen it. So that technically you could turn around a wheelchair versus just backing it up, because right now, the way that is, you're at the edge,
right,
you've got your digger in, you can just turn around and leave, correct?
right.
Well, no, I mean, right now it's a big kind of swoop, right?
Yes.
So if you just made it a deeper swoop, I guess I'm not following.
How about, I mean, could we let them come back with solutions and then
Yeah.
have this discussion when we are kind of
That's fine.
have had, time to talk about it and see what they're suggesting?
I mean,
That's fine.
I,
Sure. Were there any other issues that we wanted addressed in the solutions that they provide?
I had one question for the committee, and that was, we had planned for that area by the fence to be running grass area. Is there any reason why that running grass area now couldn't be that center area?
It's just it's smaller,
It's smaller, okay,
right? I mean, that's the only issue, it's smaller.
okay.
I mean, it's fine. If it has to be done, whatever. My concern is that when we get a drainage plan for pros and cons, I know you're gonna be able to you can do a million more things in that corner than you can do in the center thing. That doesn't mean that there aren't benefits or there isn't a solution that's good enough for the center thing. I mean, you can't run drainage pipes in the center thing that you could probably run in that corner because you're gonna run into the little kids' play area or the sidewalk or whatever. But that doesn't mean, I'm sure that doesn't mean that you couldn't find a solution that is sufficient for the middle area. And I hope that we will get a sufficient, a plan for something that is sufficient for the middle area that doesn't just include, well, you'd have to dig up this and whatever to put piping in, which is the only thing that we could possibly do. Because I'm sure that you have totally different approaches that you can take for the two different areas depending on what the situation is. And that doesn't mean that one is necessarily,
No, what it could mean only is that one could have a better solution because of the ability you have to do something. So you can cure probably both of them, and you could probably cure one at a certain point, but in certain instances, you still may have it.
Right.
Not every day.
I think you're gonna still have problems anywhere
Not every
depending
day.
on if you have crazy amounts of rainfall. But I know that you prefer it in the corner, and I know that you can find a better drainage solution for the corner because you have all the space to work around it and piping and whatever, but that doesn't mean that you could not come up with a sufficient solution for the center area, which I'm hoping that we will still be presented with a possible solution for drainage that is sufficient enough. Nothing's gonna be perfect. I know
I
nothing's
think we
perfect.
can judge and discuss that when they come back, you
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
I hear you.
Any other issues that we haven't talked about that we want to include in the solutions? Okay. Thank you for your attendance and
Thank
for your
you.
input.
Just
Thank you.
one
Yes,
other
thanks.
thing, just so you know, and from talking to Steve, the benches, the sandbox fix, okay, whatever it's gonna be, the room, the seat, and the pathway to the parking lot, of course, of the spring. And we're trying to get the final pricing in for the shade structure, because we would like to do that,
Okay.
okay? Just to
Great.
leave
Great.
it with that.
And for the seed, are we using the seed that they use down in the playgrounds in New York,
I'm
or?
not sure what they were using, I'm not sure what they
Okay.
paid, so. Right?
Okay.
Thank you, Gary.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks a lot for coming.
These last few slides are just pretty much updates. So the sitting stones, we have 3 that are left to be put in place, but those can't go into place until the grading's done around there. Any questions about that? So the Lemasier is going to hold on to those, and we'll work on the delivery for those in the spring, or assuming spring. The Connecticut wind sculpture, they have the materials, the welder, and they will start milling the parts before the welding. They're going to cut a few different types of leaf designs for the prototype, and they're looking at an installation of April 2019 as well. Questions on that? The Girl Scout tree planting, I don't know if it was the last meeting, we talked about that they reached out to us and wanted to know if we wanted to plant a tree. Everybody was supportive. And this is basically the email that I shared back with them, but I haven't heard back from Katie. I sent this a couple of times. We did try to find inventory at Mahoney's, and then Jim reached out to a few other different people around town trying to find a right kind of tree to bring back to us to say this is what his recommendation would be, and there wasn't anything existing, so it looks like it's gonna be spring, which actually I suggested might coincide nicely with Arbor Day on April 26th. So any questions on those? So that's it. So we have, our to-do list, signage, sandbox redesign, 2 to 5 area gate, maintenance plan document, environmental bill lobbying, natural play area planning plan, tree shade plan. Of these things, does anybody want to volunteer to take any of these things on? I know,
I'm doing the environmental bill.
okay. Nikki, do you want to
Yeah,
still
I'll
do the
just stick
point for
with where I was,
sandbox?
yep.
Does anybody want to work a point for the signage? Where that stands now is, John's expressed an interest in doing the work, but hasn't gotten back to me with any sort of updates. I don't know if somebody else, you want to work on that, signage?
Yeah, sure.
Great. The managing the 2 to 5 area gate, staying on top of that?
I will.
Yeah?
It's a slight passion project of mine, apparently.
The maintenance plan document, Jim gave us a document to review at the last meeting, I think, or maybe it was the meeting prior. And we said we would review it and get back to him with comments. Does anybody want to take that on?
I will do that, but I don't have that document, so if anybody else has
Yeah, I
it. I
don't-
pretty much
Yeah,
did
I don't
this to my
remember
kitchen
seeing that.
counter
It
and
was
lost a lot of
Extensive doc.
valuable and invaluable.
So I'll get the document and send it out to everyone, and then,
Thanks. I don't mind doing that.
okay.
Those kinds of
The natural play area planning plan, Sandy has said that she's going to work with Mahoney's to develop the list. She's in conversation with them about working out a sponsorship agreement potentially.
nice.
But does anybody want to be a point person with Sandy to work on that? If not, I can still sort of serve in that area.
I can probably do that too.
Okay, so you want to work with Sandy on that? And then the tree shade plan, Jim had sort of given us some drawings of where you felt like the plan would go. Does anybody want to work with Jim on?
What else needs to be done on that?
I guess just working with him on the types of trees, and then which locations are sort of the priorities and which ones we wanted to move forward with.
Okay, I thought we'd already,
Yeah, we kind of did.
I thought we already did that.
Nothing final has been presented that I know of. I know he gave us sort of a big picture of everything, but there was a lot of left.
I thought we'd
left.
pointed out a number of trees that
Yeah, I
we thought
with
were
like 3
the,
to 5 trees.
right.
Well, does somebody want to take the lead on that and bring back that final plan?
Yeah, I'll do it. Although I think I can recall us finalizing that the last
And
meeting.
maybe it's
maybe
just
John,
reminding
yeah.
him
Yeah,
and bringing
Like what
that
type of
final
tree?
plan here for us to vote on.
can you send me his contact information, Bill?
Yes.
And you and I need to work on the handoff of the brick.
I think it's Jim
Sale.
trees.
I think that makes sense, yeah.
Okay.
Hey,
Hang on,
hey
I-
Jim, it's Jenny.
All right, so then these are the available dates. This room is available and that the telemedia can televise. So do any of these dates work best for the group?
We're all in January.
Yeah.
Do you not want to meet in January? We can, I mean,
No, I think that's good. I think we'll have more with the shade structure and,
The only bad day is not, for me, is not listed there. I have a bunch of appointments that are gonna get moved in, but right now, I can work around them.
The only day I can do is the 10th, but obviously don't plan it around me.
Any one of those days works for me.
yeah, I don't have, the 10th looks fine for me. I think they all, so far.
I can do the 10th.
okay. So Thursday, January 10th. All right, great. And that is the last slide, so I would accept the motion to adjourn.
Motion to
Motion to
adjourn.
adjourn.
All
I
in
second
favor?
it.
Thirded.
Oh,
All right, meeting adjourned.
Can we
Thank
make
you.
it a thing?
Thank you.
Happy New Year.